It's showtime.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
You know, the right to bear arms is because that's the last form of defense against tyranny.
Washington is fundamentally corrupt. There are more words in the IRS code than there are in the Bible.
Made in America, heard round the world. You're listening to Blunt Force Truth. I'm Chuck Woolery, along with my co-host Mark Young, who's got something on his mind today. What do you got on your mind, Mark?
I got a couple things here, Chuck. I still can't look at you. This is so horrible.
Stop with this. Nobody else can see you. And yet,
I'm having so much fun with this, folks.
So I cut my mustache off in the, if you don't know by now, in the shower, and I just have a goatee with no mustache, and I look like Jebediah Woolery.
It's so Abe Lincoln.
Barn raising and Kristen hates it. Everybody hates it. And I'm shaving it off tomorrow.
Well, certainly, you could go over to the barbecue restaurant and not worry about getting barbecue sauce in your mustache.
You'll not be seen out with me with this. She said, no, not going to happen. And then
You're not even allowed in the restaurant now, right?
Then she said, yeah, exactly. Then she said yesterday, she said, do you think Mark will notice? I said, no, he'll never notice. He'll do 15 minutes on me.
Well, you did not escape. You could have drawn something in. You could have taken an eyeliner.
Can we describe someone in history that perhaps looked like this? That
Abe Lincoln.
Really?
Yes.
The man who said, if I could have chosen another face, I'm not two-faced, so if I could have chosen another face, I'd choose this one.
Yeah. No, that was a great comment on his part. If I was two-faced, they got to pick this one. But at any rate, no, Abe did have the mustacheless beard thing going on. You're much more handsome, obviously, than Abe Lincoln.
Devastatingly so, of course.
But Abe did have the mustacheless beard thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a good look on you. I like it.
Well, you're the only one so far.
Well, it's growing on me.
Yeah.
So I got a couple of things I want to talk to you about, Chuck, before we get to our great guest today. And my first one is reparations.
Is this insane or what?
And now we have, by the way, it's not just reparations for the Civil War. No, now it's reparations for being gay.
XYZ now. Yeah, because
now we have gay reparations.
This is just another Democrat. We're going to give you something. They never, and it never happens. They just talk about giving away this or giving away that, trying to pander for votes, and it never goes anywhere because it's ridiculous.
I cannot believe, first off, they're vilifying African Americans who spoke before Congress against the reparations.
I know.
Because they're just Uncle Toms and pandering, when this is nothing but pandering for votes. Now we have Elizabeth Warren who wants to give reparations to gays.
Well, explain why.
Well, because they've been disadvantaged not being able to file joint tax returns.
Exactly.
Which I think is absolute nonsense, and I'm going to prove it.
Oh.
And here's why. Because Ilhan Omar went and filed taxes as being married with one man when she was actually married to another man.
I know. And Minnesota, the newspaper in Minnesota finally came out, pigs will fly, and that's what they have, and they came out and recognized it. She did that,
so why didn't the gay people just file their taxes anyways? Because you could be married to 2 or 3 people and take them all off on your taxes.
This is just crazy. This is part of the crazy Democrats that have nothing to run on, and so they pick things like this. And then our guest last show was talking about we're so polarized. And well, this is one of the reasons we're polarized. The Democrats polarize everybody, and then. What was it? Tucker Carlson said it the other night. I've said it before. Whatever they accuse you of is what they're doing.
It is exactly what's going on.
Exactly right.
And now we have AOC, who is now saying that we are running concentration camps at the border.
Yeah, this is insane. On top of that,
I think that is an insult to the survivors of anyone.
Of course it is.
Who survived Nazi Germany.
Yeah, this is ignorant. Just totally. I'm not sure it approaches stupidity. I just think it's ignorance. Now it's stupid because she knows better and she's still saying it.
I mean,
so she went from ignorant to stupid.
Well, she's trying to walk it back a little bit. Yeah. She's trying to walk it back, saying that, well, I know that other bad things happened in Nazi Germany, but they still had concentration camps.
Well, you know,
and they still look like this.
They're parsing this word and saying it literally, saying where you have a concentration of people in a camp, then it's a concentration camp. So prisons are concentration camps. Cities are concentration camps. Wherever there's a concentration of people, it's no longer just a city or a prison or anything else. It's a camp.
Do you know of any recorded history that would show that Jews would break into Germany in order to get into a concentration camp?
No. And on top of that, you know, they're talking about these kids. I have no idea. I know that the system is totally overwhelmed because of the Democrats and some Republicans as well with open borders, but mostly Democrats. So now they've overwhelmed the system, and now they're complaining about they can't do anything with the kids. And they say kids are sleeping on concrete. Well, the pictures I saw of kids, they have these little roll-up things, you know, like a foam mat that they sleep on. And I thought, well, you know, they've all come about 2,000 miles from South America to here. What did they sleep on the way up?
Well, I mean,
they slept on dirt. They slept on the ground. Or they slept on, you know, who knows what.
But you see these morons.
This is so insane how they're going after, you know, of course, Trump is the villain in this, and ICE and the Border Patrol and everybody else who's in legitimate law enforcement. They're just, you know, they're terrible people, and they're treating these kids horribly. And I think Texas has now moved a bunch of them to hotels or something because it's just they can't handle all the masses of people that are coming in, children or otherwise.
They're accusing them. I heard Beta O'Rourke and Klobuchar saying how these kids are having to sleep with aluminum foil over them. They're not sleeping with
foil. That's not right.
No, they're sleeping with space blankets.
Space blankets, right? Yeah,
which are not made out of aluminum foil.
You know,
I happen to know the people who make space blankets.
Yeah, these people are just nuts. I mean, I can't imagine the average American just even giving this a moment's thought. I really can't.
Space blankets have a reflective surface on them, by the way. So
how long did it take him to come to the idea there was a crisis at the border when they constantly said there wasn't? I mean, it took them months to finally admit that there was a crisis on the border that they caused.
And here's the truth of it, folks. First off, there are no concentration camps. Secondly, when AOC claims that the Trump administration reopened the concentration camp that was used to put Japanese Americans in, understand that the Japanese Americans were put in there by the Democrats.
That's right.
And these were innocent people.
And they had a German one, too, somewhere. I don't know where it was, but, you know, I had a bunch of Germans in one camp as well during the Second World War.
Right. And we did not reopen them as concentration camps. It is nothing more than repurposing a piece of federal land.
You know, when you only get the same message over and over again every day, and Democrats know this, although CNN's viewership is below average, which means I think most of the people who watch it are below average. But anyway, it's like once you get these messages over and over again, there's no context to it. There's no understanding. It's just blatant. It is a blatant lie, and that's what you walk around with in the center of your thought process, and there's no way out.
So, folks, you got to pay attention to this stuff. What the Democrats are doing is they're very much attached to the term that if you say a lie enough times, it will become a truth.
Excuse me, that was Goebbels, wasn't it? When that
Goebbels was the originator of that. Goebbels was really good at his job.
I mean, they call us Nazis, and then they use Nazi. You know, God, it's amazing. I just am flabbergasted.
So every one of them. So where the Democrats are efficient, I'm going to tell you where they're efficient, Chuck, and that is they are really efficient on getting their talking points and their keywords into the hands of everybody.
Well, into the hands of the media, for sure, broadly.
And all the candidates. Because you will see this week they're sleeping with aluminum foil and they're in concentration camps. Everyone uses the exact same language. Last week it was constitutional crisis. Everyone used the exact same language.
Yeah, you can go through and listening to one anchor after another, and they're all saying exactly the same thing. It's in, Rush was talking about this, I think it was yesterday. I happened to watch this episode of Big Little Lies which Laura Dern is in and everything else. And so they have all these kids who are like in the second grade and they're in school. And so this guy is talking about climate change and how they're all going to die. And this one kid goes in a closet and she has this panic attack, okay? And they have to take her to the hospital and they don't understand why. I said, well, it's because they keep talking about climate change and all these kids are thinking the world's coming to an end and they just can't handle it. And so then they have this giant get together with all the parents and the principal of the school, and they talk about climate change and why do 2-year-olds or 7-year-olds need to know about this and why are you scaring them all to death? And I thought, wait a minute, this is a purpose capsulization of exactly what the Democrats do. They try to scare the crap out of you over something that isn't real and then run on it and never fix it because it wasn't real to begin with.
So, Chuck, are you familiar with the guy by the name of Ed Markey?
No, that does not ring a bell.
Okay, so Ed Markey is the other senator in Massachusetts, along with, what's her name, Hiawatha?
Yes.
But we need to understand something, folks. This guy's as nuts as her. Now, he doesn't seem to be appropriating anybody's
You know what my question is that I'm really curious about? You have New York, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. These are all states, I mean, among others, but these are all states that where our founding fathers gathered, where the nation was formed, and they've all gone just crazy left.
Well, this is a guy who I want to give you a little background here. This guy, first off, he was elected under special election to replace John Kerry. Because you remember Obama elected, what's his name, Herman Munster to be the Secretary of State.
Right.
So this guy's the guy that slid in
ever since.
I know, and this guy, he's never left. So just get a little background on some of this guy's kooky stuff. He's immediately jumped on with AOC on the Green New Deal.
Of course.
He says members of the Tea Party are allergic to science. And this is the one that, wait a minute, hang on. Pay attention here. This is something he just did this year. He and 11 senators are sponsoring the Climate Security Act of 2019. That sounds like a great act, doesn't it?
God.
This is legislation to form a new group within the State Department to develop strategies to integrate climate science and data into national security operations.
You know,
follow with me here.
Go ahead.
Hang on. As well as to restore the post of special envoy for the Arctic. And you have to have an envoy to the Arctic who's going to report on security issues to the president, which I can only think means Santa Claus is at risk because someone is going after the North Pole. Think of all the great military, things that happened in the
they
North.
pull all this stuff. The polar bear thing they went on. I mean, Al Gore started that and went with that forever. And finally, we find out that the polar bear population is increasing. It's not decreasing. And then on top of that, they have all these people, these scientists, so-called, who have money in the game, and they're all pro global warming and climate change and all that. But you never, ever hear from a dissenting side of other scientists who have their degrees from Harvard and other places that don't believe in it at all and tell you why. And then they use carbon as their leverage point. It's the thing that we breathe out every day that the planet can't exist without, that green plants can't grow without. I mean, it's just insane. And yet they sell it.
Well, we have a guest with us today who is not only not a fake Indian, but he is also not a fake scientist. He is actually a real scientist.
Yeah.
And with us is our friend Shiva Ayyaduri, folks. I'm going to give you a little background. Shiva has 4 degrees from MIT. That's a lot of MIT degrees, isn't it?
Just to make fun of them.
He is a world-renowned scientist, a Fulbright scholar, a Lemelson MIT Award finalist, and he is also the inventor of email.
He's way too smart to be a Republican.
And Shiva is actually single-handedly the reason, Chuck, why you keep getting emails from the Nigerian prince's wife offering to deposit $78 million into your bank account.
Which was overlooked by my family somehow.
Yes. So, Shiva, thank you for that. But anyways, Shiva, it's great to have you back, man. Love having you here. And Shiva, you are going to run for Senate against this lunatic, Ed Markey, correct?
So, Mark and Chuck, first of all, it's great to be here. You guys are great.
Thank you.
Mark, his name is Ed Markey with a K. So,
Markey. Sorry. Okay, Ed Markey.
It's a good name because we call him Ed Malarkey. Okay, which is so if so it's really about truth versus malarkey, and it's a very interesting. I think it's going to be a very interesting election in 2020 because what you guys are talking about is that the foundation of it is truth versus lies. And the fact that his name is, I mean, in our campaigns, we call him Ed Malarkey. And I think it's going to stick just like the fake Indian, real Indian did.
Now, will you be able to debate him? Because the left doesn't like to debate the right. They'll debate each other, but they won't debate the right.
Yeah, well, the important thing is, Chuck, I'm running as a Republican. Last time, as you know, we'll talk about the Massachusetts GOP. In many ways, they're essentially a wing of the Democratic Party. They do not support the president. The governor, who's a quote unquote Republican,
who we were told on our last show that the government was, or the governor was highly thought of. Yeah,
the governor. Well, he's done a PR campaign to position himself as the most popular governor. While Massachusetts has the worst public infrastructure, 47th out of the 50 states' worst infrastructure, the worst in corruption. Yet, as you said,
sounds like he's pretty good at his job.
That's what I'm saying. He's a Democrat.
So far, he's right up there with Washington.
He's a Democrat in Republican clothing. Mm-hmm. And the guy that his mentor is a guy called Bill Weld, who's
I remember Bill Weld,
Republican running against Trump, right? The president.
Yeah, he's got a great chance, I'm sure.
Yeah, he's got no chance. But I think the important thing to recognize is if you look at, you and I were talking about earlier, Chuck, if you look at sort of the serpent of the deep state, my theory is Massachusetts represents sort of the brain trust of that serpent. And I used to think it's the Democrats who ran that, but it's the Massachusetts GOP, which in some ways is the head of that because, again, the governor of Massachusetts, Republican, and the former governor both hate Trump. Mm-hmm. And these are sort of the old, British who never left. And that's what's fascinating about this, because why is it that they're so much against the president? Because these guys represent control. And when Donald Trump won, he perturbed and disturbed their control. And I would say that Massachusetts is the center of that deep state control, reflected by, Harvard, MIT, all these deep state institutions. And it's fascinating. It's the Massachusetts GOP. So when I ran last year, they should have embraced me. I'm a self-made guy. Many ways reflect the values of the Republican Party. Instead, I had to run as an independent. We got 5 times more votes as an independent than any independent ever ran. And we could have defeated Elizabeth Warren had they supported. So this time we're going to run as a Republican, Chuck, primarily because I don't need to, they can't manipulate the votes with the 15% delegate rule. So I just have to get on the ballot. And we need to get about 200,000 votes to win the Republican nomination. We have a very, very good shot at that if we can get our message out broadly to the Trumpers in Massachusetts.
Who do you have to depend on to get your message out?
Oh, well, it's not going to be mainstream media.
The Boston Globe probably won't be part of that message.
No, I think it's guys like you. It's guys like the people who really care about this country, want to see real Republicans get elected. The good news is, we got 100,000 votes. We spent less than 70 cents a vote. Warren spent about $30 a vote. And that was because those 100,000 people who voted for us, Chuck and Mark, were in many ways real patriots. They got over the fake Indian, real Indian thing. They got over, the mass GOP. So I think we got an extremely good shot. And I'm looking forward to it because this guy, Ed Markey or Malarkey, really is the doppelganger, the twin of AOC. If you see the pictures when she launched the Green New Deal, the Skeletor guy who Markey standing next to her is her Senate compadre.
Yeah, he's full in on this new Green Deal, isn't he?
Every email he sends out, Mark, is the earth is going to blow up, the earth is going to die, Trump is going to destroy the earth. We have to, get the Green New Deal in.
Now, wait a minute. I thought we all died from net neutrality
Right. Well, he was a bit
from Obamacare.
Yeah, Markey was a guy who was big behind the net neutrality, never really addressing the issue of Google or Facebook. They got to, they didn't get any shakedown. So you're looking at someone who's been in this in Congress since 1876. Sorry, 1976, right? I mean, these guys have been in there for 40 years, and I think that a guy like him should actually support someone like me because he says he believes in inclusivity, diversity, all these kinds of things. But one of the fundamental things, Chuck and Mark, we're going to bring out in this campaign is that fundamentally it's science versus malarkey, or truth versus malarkey. And Massachusetts is supposed to be the center of innovation in science. So how do you get real science occurring? Well, you get real science occurring by having freedom. The founding fathers wanted open discourse, free speech, and debate. And it wasn't just for those reasons alone, but because in that environment, we could actually have debate and let the scientific method rule, which it means that you enter into uncertainty, you run experiments, you get back data, and you're constantly questioning yourself. It was always about skepticism, questioning, free speech. And that is the real, fertile ground from where you get real science. And from real science, you find truth. And from truth, you can identify real problems where you solve you innovate real solutions for the health of our body or planet, et cetera. Instead, what they're trying to do, Chuck and Mark, is impose this new thing called scientific consensus. In fact, Schumer and Malarkey are sponsors of a bill, which is Bill 791, which says that there will be no more discourse on climate change.
Of course not.
No more discourse. No.
And this is what, and help me out. You're a scientist. How does science ever say that something is settled science? Explain to me how science can ever have a settled science on something.
It isn't. I mean, Einstein said something interesting. His theory of relativity, which tries to explain Newton's law of gravitation, he said, it doesn't matter how many people think my stuff works, but one experiment could destroy my theory. And that's what a real scientist is about. You're constantly looking for people to poke holes at you, because that's how a law or theory gets protected. What Schumer and Malarkey are trying to do, the bill that they have says that because there's quote unquote scientific consensus on climate change, therefore no government agency, no government discourse on it. Now, what's cool about science is 99 people could believe the sun goes around the earth, and one guy could have all the data showing that's not true. The earth goes around the sun. And science is not based on some democratic vote. It's based on the actual facts. That's what's so beautiful about science, right? It doesn't matter what your opinion is or what you believe. It's actually based on ground reality.
How many scientific breakthroughs have ever happened because of consensus?
Never. And in fact, Einstein never published one paper on what's called peer review.
He was a loser anyways. What did he know?
He was a big loser. and the last paper he sent in, Mark and Chuck, was a paper that he sent in, and this is when they started creating this thing called peer review, right, which is consensus among your peers. And he said, "What?" He goes, "Give me my paper back." He goes, "How can any new science be based on peer review? Because ultimately, a scientist is a revolutionary because you're always pushing the envelope. So you can never be subject to peer review. The theory about science should be whatever you want to propose, it should be published, and let people debate it out, whether they think it's ridiculous or not." So the foundation of science was you have this thing called the scientific method. You see something in nature, apple falls from a tree, and based on seeing that apple, you come up with your model. Well, I think it's the mass of the apple times the mass of the earth over some distance squared cause that, and that was Newton's law, right? And then he had to test it. Some other guy can come up with the theory of why that's occurring. That was Einstein. And the issue is you're supposed to have open discourse, poke holes, poke holes, poke holes. And over enough time of poking holes, you say, you know what, this thing stands up to rigor. When you go to climate change, and by the way, what's great about this climate change issue, it exposes the way that the Democrats and the establishment wants to treat all truth. It's sort of the fake news behind fake news, which is fake science. So the way they want to do it is the following way. Okay, our data is not matching up. I'll give you an example. When I started looking at the climate change stuff, I went into it very open-minded, and ultimately the climate change phenomenon, I think everyone will agree to the following. climate does change. No one will disagree. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. No one will disagree. Greenhouse gases do increase temperature. No one will disagree. And humans put out greenhouse gases. That's not the issue, though. It's yes, 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 yes to all those four things. The fundamental issue is how much, right? How much does CO2 affect temperature? Well, in order to do that, you have to solve a very complex equation and a set of equations, Mark and Chuck, and that's called Navier-Stokes equation in fluids. To keep it simple, when you take a fluid mechanics class, it's known that the Navier-Stokes equation is unsolvable for turbulent fluids. Mm-hmm. Okay, what is a turbulent fluid? Like a babbling brook, boiling water. You can solve Navier-Stokes for water coming out of a spout. Now, what the problem with this whole climate stuff is you have two turbulent fluids, the atmosphere, a very complex turbulent fluid, and the ocean. So we can't even solve Navier-Stokes for one turbulent fluid, and these guys are claiming they've solved it for two. It's an impossible problem. In fact, you can win $1 million. It's called the Millennial Prize if you solve it for even one turbulent fluid. So anyone who knows fluid mechanics, anyone who knows radiative physics, which are, by the way, the real scientists, there is no science called climate science. It's been a fabricated science. It's just been created. Dick Lindzen, who was a head of the meteorology group at MIT, he wrote to Trump saying, get out of the Paris Climate Accords. When he did that, about 100 professors at MIT attacked him. And I said, Dick, why do they do this? He goes, Shiva, it's money. MIT gets around $20 to $40 million for climate change impact grants. It has nothing to do with science. There's no field called climate science.
It has to do with ideology and government. It has nothing to do. It has to do with money and how you spend it and whether you're funded. That's really what it is. And I'm not sure people understand it or can get their head around it with everything else that's swirling around us all the time.
It's controlling language, Chuck. Think about assault weapons. There's no such thing as an assault weapon.
No, I know.
But they create these terms.
They create these. So when I look at it, we used to, up until the 70s, as Dick Lindzen was explaining to me, there was a point where we did have basic research and basic science. But after the 70s, after after Vietnam War, an amendment called the Mansfield Amendment was passed, which basically said that there was a point in American sort of science history, the military had a huge budget, massive budget, and a little piece of that was funded for basic research. And so you had some guy doing really cool research, but it was such a small piece of a large budget, that research was allowed to take place, and you got good science. But after Vietnam, the Mansfield Amendment said that you can no longer fund basic research from the military unless it was for weaponry. So what ended up happening was that little piece of a very large budget moved over to the National Science Foundation, which was a big piece of a small budget, right? The NSF is a completely political organization. So science became politicized when that took place in a very ironic way. So what you have now is to explain to people in very simple terms, Chuck, if you or Mark, comes out with your PhD, you have 7 years to go be a professor, what's called a tenured professor, which means you never have to work again after those 7 years if you get tenure. Well, during those 7 years, both you guys are competing to write as many papers as you can, and it's not only how many papers you write, but how many other people cite your research. So Chuck, let's say both you guys are competing to become the biggest physicists in a field, right? Let's say fission or something. Well, Mark, you could publish a lot of papers. Chuck, you could publish a lot of papers. But let's say Mark's papers is the one that are cited by other people in the field, even though you may have done great work. Guess who's going to get tenure? Mark. But Mark may have
take that, Chuck.
Right. But Mark may have spent his 7 years sucking up, right? Kissing ass to the people in the field, partying with them.
It was a tough 7 years, I've got to admit. But
right.
You know what? If you ever get on a debate stage with whatever his name is, Malarkey, you should ask him to explain climate change to you. You just say, I know you're for climate change, so can you explain it? How does it work?
Yeah, he can't explain it.
I know, but it'd be a great question for him just to watch him fumble around with it.
Yeah, because ultimately the entire climate...
Because you can explain it.
I can explain it very precise, and I can explain it because it took me a lot of time to look at the math, look at the equation, but I can explain it now in less than a minute to anyone, how it actually works.
That's a great little debate.
Go on, I can explain it to you guys if you're interested. But it's very simple. Do you want me to explain it?
Sure.
So this is the whole fundamental issue. the sun is about 6,000 degrees, and the sun puts out what's called 340 watts per meter of energy, okay? Mm-hmm. That comes to the Earth. Well, in order for the Earth to maintain equilibrium, that 340 has got to get sent back, right? So you have net zero energy. So 140 of that watts per meter gets bounced off the atmosphere. So how much do you have coming into the Earth? 200, right? 340 minus 140. That 200, Chuck and Mark, the way that gets released is through a process called convection, no different than when you boil a pot of water, the vapor that releases. That convection occurs between these two interacting fluids, the atmosphere and the ocean, all right? And that's how the Earth maintains homeostasis. And that can only be done if the Earth's average temperature, which is a heating plate of the Earth's surface, is 15 degrees Kelvin, all right? Yep. And no one disagrees with what I just said.
Over to you, McCarkle, whatever his name is. Take your shot at it.
So that's the basics. Now, what the climate change or the quote-unquote climate change guys says, they say if you double CO2, the levels of CO2, that will increase the amount of energy that's trapped in the atmosphere by 3.7 watts, which will translate to about a 3-degree rise in temperature, okay? Mm-hmm. That model that they came up with that is based on doing this math of two turbulent fluids, which is unsolvable.
Right, which they do not have.
Which they don't have. Yeah, it's an indeterminate. So I'll give you an example. At the last IPCC meeting, they had 40 models which predict how much ice will melt on the Arctic, right? One model says nothing will melt. Another model says 100%. And there's flavors in between, 20, 30, 40. That's not science. That would be like Newton saying an apple drops from the tree. One of his equations say it gets suspended at 10 feet. Another one says, you know what I'm saying? That's called indeterminate.
Right.
The bottom line is it's completely bullshit. It's totally fake science. And yet what's happened is it's been wrapped around by by the way, the last IPCC report of 2018, the 280 scientists, if you actually go read the report, which I've done, they say this is all BS, nothing's matching up. Right when the broader group of scientists attack it, they have a smaller backroom meeting, around 20 of them, and then they reframe it for the press. So same thing in the 90s, when the Rio conference took place, a bunch of scientists said this is not matching up. And that's when, if you realize, Al Gore got scared, and that's when he put out the movie. So every time the actual scientists look at it, the smaller group gets scared and they do PR. So this whole thing is fake. Now, the real issue is we need to lower pollution. So if you go through my thesis, let's apply truth. Let's find the real problem is we got to lower pollution. Well, the Paris Accords, which everyone hyped up on, all these people, hanging out in Paris, whatever, having a great time, they essentially promoted the Paris Accords. Well, the Paris Accords, if you read it, allows China to double from 11. They're allowed to pollute another 11 billion metric tons of carbon, 11 billion. And India is allowed to double its metric tons. In fact, the U.S. was going down. So what is China putting out? Well, sulfur, lead, these are pollutants. The number one cause of death in the world is air pollution. So these guys do not want, and by the way, Monsanto loves climate change. Go to their website. Why? Because they're the ones who are dumping all these pesticides, which affect the oceans. They're the ones who are hurting the actual environment. AOC, in my view, is a front for Monsanto. Monsanto, go to their website. They love the climate change doctrine because they get to pollute us more. They get to give us more pesticides, and all of that goes unchecked. So
why is she not campaigning against glyphosate?
Exactly.
If she cared about people.
Why is she promoting her number? I mean, it gets very fascinating when if you want to get down to her senior advisor was the major cannabis lobbyist who was funded, and that lobbying group was funded by Soros. 1 gram of cannabis, which is now grown in these hermetically sealed greenhouses, requires 2 kilowatt hours of energy. Okay. 1 gram of aluminum requires 0.02, 100 times more. So if you looked at how much cannabis is now growing in Washington State, you're going to need an entire Grand Coulee Dam. And no solar, no wind is going to do it. So one of the memes I put out was someone with the new Green Deal smoking, a spliff, and behind them a bunch of coal-fired plants. So these people are creating a false narrative, and the foundation of this is to tax the shit out of the average American. The the average American worker. It's to grab more taxes out of them. So workers' wages are dropping or flat. Meanwhile, the academics' wages go up. Elizabeth Warren, all these people in Massachusetts, they promote a fake science, and the goal is to extract another pound of flesh from the American worker. That's what this is about. I mean, you just need to look at two curves. The American wages have stayed flat or down, and the wages of the academics and administrators in major private universities has gone up. And these guys manufacture fake science, which then the stupid press just cuts and pastes, and then it becomes, fossilized on Wikipedia.
You know what's overlooked by the American people and probably the press, anybody who wants to release it, and my friend Mark has one of these, are electric cars. Electric cars would not exist if it were not for fossil fuels, period.
Yeah, where are you plugging them in?
Just period.
Right. Well, think of a couple things that Shiva just talked about here, Chuck. First off, he's talking about you have 100 different climate science reports that will go anywhere from 0 ice melt to 100%.
Models. Yeah.
Right, models, and every flavor in between. But we have a Congress that is saying that's settled science.
Oh, I know.
We have models from 0 to 100. How do you call that a settled science when you don't even have
everybody who doesn't believe in it science deniers, which I find fascinating.
Well, think about it. They're claiming consensus, and they don't even have a consensus.
There's no consensus here. So science is based on reproducible predictions. If I drop an apple from here to the earth, right? The equation says the force between that is the gravitational constant times m1 times m2 over r squared. It doesn't matter. It's perfect. That is an actual model that works.
Right, and it's always going to fall at the same speed.
Exactly. They don't have a model. It's indeterminate. You would say that's indeterminate. So what you fundamentally have going on and by the way, there's a lot of hope too. I'll explain why.
But Shiva, let me interrupt you for a second. You made up a great point. You just said it's indeterminate. This is a group of people who say that gender is indeterminate.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about science, these are people who say that there's 57 different genders.
78.
Yeah.
78.
And now we have 40 different models for how much ice will melt. So it's indeterminate. That's what the truth is.
You think the average American can get their head around this?
I think, here's the good news, Chuck. The average American does. Let me tell you why. The 50% who don't believe in climate change get it. And who are they? They're real scientists or common sense people. And I figured out why this is true. What's the dichotomy is the following. You have the academics who I've just told you in the last 30 years, they're all prostitutes, okay? And I mean that in a very, very, not just
literal way.
They basically, after the 70s, science was supposed to be a place where you went into an institution. You were supposed to be a whistleblower and a rabble rouser, right? You were supposed to push the envelope of innovation. Now what they have is a bunch of lemmings because that's how you get funding. That's how you get your tenure. So the academics are sucking up to get government funding. The students whose parents are spending $200,000, $300,000 sending their kids to these institutions are the vulnerable elites. So they have a $200,000 loan. So in class, they're not questioning their professors, Chuck. They're sucking up to their professors who's sucking up to government grants because they want to get A's and B's. If you talk to some when I was teaching at MIT or other people, the guy who gets a B these days, he really doesn't know what he's doing. The guy who gets an A may know it. The grades are inflated because these institutions are taking a lot of money and they want to make sure their students get placed. So the whole thing is a complete racket. So you have vulnerable.
It's a sham.
It's a complete sham. So you have these vulnerable elites getting out there who think they know better. And those are the people that are the army of the academics or the army of the establishment.
Counter with the compliant media.
Exactly. But counter to that, the good news is the average guy who works for a living, the nurse, the plumber, the electrician, the engineer, we have to deal with physical and natural laws. If you're an electrician, you
have to deal with reality is what you're saying.
If you connect the wrong thing, you're going to blow yourself up.
Right.
Those people are not buying the climate change doctrine because it doesn't add up. So that's the good news. Those are the people who voted for Donald Trump. So what I'm trying to say is the vulnerable elites, the educated idiots, are the army of these people in a very, very profound way because the academics are not the smartest guys anymore. They're basically, sellouts. John Kennedy in 1960 gave a beautiful speech at the National Academy of Sciences, and he said this. He goes, we have a problem with democracy. He goes, the problem is the problems of the world have become so sophisticated, we rely on you, referring to these scientists, to help us figure things out. But the assumption is that you are disinterested and objective and are public servants. But that's no longer true, Chuck. These people have become part of the triangle of politicians, celebrities, and academia.
They've been sucked into the ideology. That's all.
Exactly. So
it's disgraceful.
Yeah. So that's why this book Climate of Science is coming out, and I call the title "The Climate of Science," and the subtitle is much worse than you think. That's why I think Massachusetts is a great place, and this 2020 election is going to be awesome because you have someone like me who came from nothing, worked his butt off, started 7 companies, actually understands science and physics and math and engineering. And here in Massachusetts, Ed Markey, malarkey, he's got no degrees in science. Elizabeth Warren
He's a lawyer.
He's a lawyer, and he's been there for a long time. Right.
Yeah, that's just what we need is another lawyer.
No, what we need to get rid of lawyers, and we need to put in scientists.
Engineers, plumbers, electricians, people who actually have to deal with reality every day. Nurses. That's what the founding fathers wanted. So I think so when you look at the climate change piece, I think the great thing about that is that it is the tip of the iceberg, which has come way out about how academia has completely sold out science. And now if you take that same approach to immigration, to gun violence. So, in the book, I talk about each one of these issues. So you have the fake science and the real science. Take gun violence, for example. There's 40,000 people die of gun violence in the United States. Sepsis, which is a disease that you get from infection, 40,000 people die of sepsis in the United States. Guess how much research we fund in sepsis? About $100 million, and about 100,000 papers are written. Guess how much research we fund in gun violence? No, we don't even fund the research. The CDC is not allowed to fund research according to the Dickey Amendment. So therefore, what happens is there's only 400 papers written on gun violence. One paper written by a woman who did a multi-system study. She said, look, gun violence is not just one issue, it's 5 issues. Not enough family, psychotropic drugs, bullying, surveillance. And one of the issues, she said, was access to weapons. But she said her conclusion was if you remove even one of those items, you can eliminate gun rampages. But they choose to just say, let's take away the guns. When you can increase family, bonds, etc. So what's happening is the Harvard School of Public Health, will promote the narrative, you got to eliminate guns. So these guys are essentially paid academics who write whatever is done so they can get tenure. And remember what tenure is. You get salary for the rest of your life, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000.
You can't get fired.
Yeah, you can't get fired. And you get the best health care. So right. Elizabeth Warren is collecting $400,000, what she was. She gets amazing health care that the average American doesn't. And here she's preaching about diversity, talking about reparations, all this nonsense.
I've always said everybody who wants these gun laws should just move to the south side of Chicago. They got all they want.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And by the way, you can remove just train teachers how to look, observe and care for their kids better. And that's what that research showed. But that research will never see the light of day. Mm-hmm. So what you really have is a complete control of science. And I would argue, everyone talks about the 1%. I would say it's 5 university presidents control science in the entire world, for that matter.
I'm going to tell you something that you have going for you that your opponent doesn't have going for you. That's very simple. And I'm sure you're aware of this, but nobody really articulates this. The left is incapable, as your opponent is incapable, of solving a problem. They cannot solve a problem. You can.
Well, created email.
Yeah, I invented
solve a problem.
Conservatives can solve problems.
Email was about, it wasn't the military exchanging, it was about secretaries in the 1970s who were typing away all day long. If they had 10 cc's, I took that problem, converted to the electronic version, called it email, etc. And the issue with that is when that story came out, who attacked me, Mark? And it was the white liberals, in Massachusetts and the elite historians, because the truth about that says that anyone, can solve problems and bring solutions anywhere in this country. And that's what the country was about. But we have consolidated academic power to a few institutions. And I would say that's the real issue. A few liberal institutions who controls science right now. So, you know,
we
one guy.
We can't have some poor kid from India coming in and showing up all these geniuses at MIT.
Or a poor kid in Franklin, Idaho, who created Follow Farnsworth, who created TV, or the poor Michigan mechanic who created the wind wiper thing. And, you know, that was actually stolen by MIT professors who built the control system series. So the narrative always is that you go to these institutions, you get ordained, right? And then you are an innovator, et cetera. And that's what Donald Trump's election was really about. He was busting that up. That's why the quote unquote, the blue bloods, it's interesting, blue bloods in Massachusetts, be it Republican or Democrat, hate him so much.
I can understand it.
Yeah, because the center of that power, I would argue, is Massachusetts. Mark?
I agree with you. Chuck, we're going to take a quick break here and hear from our friends over at Blue Emu, and we're going to be right back.
Okay.
Blue Emu works fast and you won't stink. This episode of Blunt Force Truth is brought to you by Blue Emu Pain Relief Products. Now, I've been in show business for many years now, and I'm not slowing down, but I can use a little help every now and then. Blue Emu's family of products are made in America and have become a staple in my life. The deep penetrating formula of Blue Emu Original is best for supporting my muscles and joints, and I'm sure you've seen it. It's on the shelf in a blue and white jar. I also use Maximum Arthritis for any arthritic pain and the lidocaine cream for numbing pain relief. Not only do these Blue Emu formulas work great, there's no chill, no burn, and no odor. Blue Emu, it works fast and you won't stink. Available at Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, Amazon, and other fine retailers.
So I've got a question for you here then.
Yeah.
Or a comment. The guy you're running against, Malarkey.
Yeah.
This guy's never actually had a job, has he?
Never had a job. Never had a job. I think he sold ice cream for a brief period.
How could he possibly solve a problem if he's never had a job?
No, wait a minute here. If he sold ice cream, that means that explains some of his climate change experience. Because he was able to watch the ice cream melt. If there was bicycle cooler warming, he would have that experience. This guy, Chuck, he went to college to become a lawyer, dodged the Vietnam War, and then immediately became an elected official.
Sounds like Joe Biden.
This guy has never held a job. I mean, we need job creators.
The people of Massachusetts that there's a better deal and they better make it, and it's to their advantage.
But we need people in Congress who have made jobs, who have written payroll checks, who have solved real problems, who understand science, who understand physics, who understand business. How this guy has 1 year's experience that he's repeated 40 times, not 40 years of experience.
Well, one of the things, Chuck and Mark, is that you may know this actor Pierce Brosnan. Pierce is Pierce just funded this movie, which I'm the main scientist in, which just came out. It's on iTunes and Netflix, called Poisoning Paradise. It's a great movie because it basically exposes how the big agrobiotech.
Pierce Brosnan? Really?
Yeah, Pierce. Pierce is an interesting guy. He's Chuck, you're out there, right?
Yeah, I know. I've never met him, but
so Pierce and I became friends.
He's an awesome actor. He really is.
Great, but he's a real actor. You know, he was a graphic designer.
Really good.
He trained in acting. He's not a guy who just wanted to be a celebrity, right? So he did a movie.
It was about shapeshifters.
Yeah.
And I happened to see that. It took me 15 minutes or more to realize that was Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah.
He was so good. It was amazing.
So Pierce and his wife is they live on partially they live on the island of Kauai. The western part of Kauai during the Vietnam War was used as a testing ground, open airfield testing ground for Agent Orange. And then it's used, and there's so basically that entire area has been used for all the big, Monsanto, Syngenta, et cetera. So the film essentially exposes how on the island of Kauai, what's been going, it's a beautiful island. It's called Poisoning Paradise. And I had about 4 years ago finished some very cool research using my technology, Cytosolve, to expose how genetic engineering of soy and actually creates formaldehyde in the soy plant. So they asked me to be in the movie. I did a test shoot. They liked it. But it's a great movie because it shows how in Kauai it was a grassroots movement. They actually beat the the local legislature, how the mayor overruled them, how the city council overruled the mayor. Then it went to the judges in the state and how they overruled. Eventually, they have a win that they just got. But what's powerful about the movie is it's about eliminating pesticides. It's about getting rid of safety. And what's fascinating is Bobby Kennedy, who Bobby, he's come out against the vaccine stuff. He's also in the movie. But Bobby brings up this important point that without informed consent, that's violation of the Nuremberg Code. So I just did a tweet to, the idiot AOC. That's
an insult to idiots all over the world. You know that.
But she is essentially, because what's happening is we're not focusing on reducing pollution. That's the real problem.
Correct.
We're focused on reducing CO2. CO2 is not a pollutant. In fact, we need CO2. We're at the lowest levels of CO2 in the Earth's history, around 300 million. We actually need to increase CO2, but we need to lower pollution.
We're doing nothing about the incredible amount of chemicals that we're exposing our bodies to.
Exactly.
We're doing nothing about, how much research is being done looking at the effects of EMF frequencies on the human body? Exactly.
And China, meanwhile, was allowed to do another 11 billion more metric tons. So they're putting out more SO2, more lead. None of that. So my theory on this whole thing is these people are actually a front for Monsanto and the big ag. And I think that's how we should expose them, because we need to lower pollution. We need to lower these that's where we should be putting the research, because this entire
the thing of it is, when you say lower pollution, to my untrained ears and mind, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that.
Sulfur dioxide.
Let me put it this way.
Yep.
When you say lower pollution, the first thing that comes to my mind is a smokestack. So that's where I think probably the average person looks at it and says, well, that would be my exhaust pipe or a smokestack.
Yeah. That's part of it, Chuck. But let me give you an example. You take a chemical like glyphosate, which you know,
that is.
Yes, you know it because you know it under the name Roundup.
Okay. Fine, I know that.
Now, this is a chemical that is not just sprayed on your lawn. This is chemical that is sprayed on all your food.
I understand that. But what I'm saying to Shiva is, can you explain pollutant when you talk about pollutant?
I think what Chuck's saying is that I think that one way to say is, look, CO2 is not a pollutant.
Yeah, it's people don't understand what pollution is, I don't think. They think of the ocean with plastic floating around, or they think of garbage, or they think of smokestacks. You almost have to get in and say, this is what we need to clean up, this kind of stuff, and be specific.
I think you're right. I'm
sorry to say that, but I'm a simple guy. So.
No, I think you're right. I think what we need to specifically say is, look, we need to lower lead levels in the atmosphere. We need to eliminate the amount of plastic. We need to lower, as Mark said.
That sounds like you're talking about the south side of Chicago.
Right, like glyphosate.
Well, talk about the lead being fired at everybody.
Yeah, that's a different kind of lead. Yeah, but I think you're right, Chuck. I think the more specific, because ultimately, I think what is the purpose of all of these policies? It's ultimately for the health of the human being, right? Mm-hmm. If you can have all the jobs.
What a great distinction, though, to come against climate change with pollutant and say, this is what we really need to do, and this is what we're doing, and it's completely wrong.
Exactly.
That's a great distinction.
But you also, Chuck, you look at AOC. The world's going to end in 12 years if we don't enact the Green New Deal and get rid of all of our airplanes and automobiles. Meanwhile, China and India is going to be doubling the amount of greenhouse gas and pollution they're dumping out. Yeah. So how does us sending ourselves back to the Stone Ages save the world under their model when the rest of the world is dumping into the atmosphere?
But there's a whole group of people who are about that, who want to go back in time to where there's nothing, there's no fossil fuels.
You mean guys who shave their mustache to look like the Amish? Those guys?
No, not those guys. But I mean, there are a group of people, I don't know what they're called, but they do have a
They're
name.
called Amish.
Yeah, okay.
Well, many of those people, Chuck, they live sort of hypocritic. And I remember.
Of course they do. They all drive SUVs. They all fly airplanes. I mean, it's insane.
I went to one of these yoga ashrams in India, and the yogi there was talking all this stuff, living with nature, right? Mm-hmm. And then suddenly he takes out his cell phone and he answers a call right in the middle of his
and then gets into his Rolls Royce and leaves.
Right. So the issue is history moves forward. We progress. The issue is how can we, use technology, and that's what I call real innovation. And so in my view, there's the aspects of truth, freedom, and health, which drive us to really have, courage, vision, to actually move society to a golden age, which can come from us starting to understand that you have to allow science to really take place. The opposition to that is power, profit, and control by a few people who want to take us into the dark ages. But if we follow the substantive area that you actually have, freedom of speech, and where real science can prosper, then you get amazing innovations. So, for example, fusion, right? We talk about fission. If we really wanted to solve this problem with the greening, we would be pounding. And the concept of we have capabilities now to support fusion research.
Absolutely, and we're doing nothing with it.
Yeah, we should be putting like the Manhattan Project. We should take all the scientists, throw them to the top of a mountain in New Mexico, and say you have 3 years to solve this fusion issue. And I'm sure we'll solve it. But that's not what the incentive is. The incentive is to promote nonsense. So we promote a thing called the carbon tax credit or the carbon equity, so we can rape everyone on the planet. And a few people can become trillionaires like Al Gore. So they don't ever want to solve the real problem, nor do they ever want to address the real problem. So they create fake solutions to fake problems. That's what's fundamentally going on.
Chuck, for your benefit, when we're talking about fusion, we're talking about a process of making energy that has no byproduct, that has little to no waste.
At all, it's water. You take water in and you get essentially water out.
Right. So we're talking about zero pollution energy.
I understand. This may be a little off topic, but I'm curious to get your take on this. Something is coming up. It seems like you hear about it all the time. It's kind of in the background, and yet everybody's curious about it. They've been curious about it since the 50s. What do you think about this whole UFO sighting things of aircraft that can move so fast and so laterally and everything in all these directions? What do you think about that?
Well, do you remember that movie Social Network? Mesrich.
Mark's shaking his head. So one of us.
Yeah. But there was I forget I forget his first name. Mesrich just wrote a book, and I went to about 2 years ago, called The 37th Parallel. And this guy's a very esteemed writer, and he basically looks at all the UFO sightings. And this guy's not like some conspiracy fringe guy, right?
Right.
And he says that all of these UFO sightings take place on the 37th parallel. And there's an interesting theory around this.
Really, I didn't know that.
But what he finds is it's a fiction, nonfiction story. And he says that, I think starting in the 70s, any UFO sighting was supposed to be, if you were an aircraft pilot, or you were supposed to call an 800 number. They outsourced it, Chuck. Okay?
To India, probably.
Yeah, India, and then that guy. But basically, they have these guys who come in a black helicopter, like Men in Black, and they investigate that thing. And he found out that, for example, when Roswell actually took place, that the initial report was this aircraft came, and it had hieroglyphic-like symbols on it. A few days later, the military crashed a weather balloon, and they rewrote the story. Okay, but so anyway, he's telling incident after incident after incident. So I asked him, so someone in the audience when he was doing this book signing said, how could the government possibly ever hide this, right? And he said, let me tell you, when the Manhattan Project was taking place, do you know that the government ensured that the word nuclear or bomb or anything was removed from every newspaper in the United States? There were 100,000 different people working all over the country on different parts of the nuclear bomb, and the government was able to control that, right? So the point is, it doesn't, people should not be surprised that the level of control that the government can do and to hide information.
Shiva, all somebody has to do is go visit the Greenbrier.
What is that?
That's a hotel in West Virginia where the Congress used to have a spot in the bottom. It's a golf club and a beautiful hotel and all this kind of stuff. But it was where Congress would gather to protect themselves in case of a nuclear war. It was exposed about 15 years ago. And
right, but prior to that, the government managed to build a massive underground complex underneath a golf resort, as Chuck said, and they were able to hide it from the public, including they were able to hide it from the public when they were there pouring thousands of yards of concrete into it. they managed to keep it hidden.
Right. So that's the point to Mesrich's point. People can hide stuff. Look, the whole thing with, I think, my opinion is, we're finding more and more and more planets. I think it's insane to think that there is not other life. And now relative to the UFOs, Chuck, they could be our own machinery, right?
Everybody keeps saying it could be us, or it could be the Russians, or it could be,
Yeah, it could be, I mean, there is probably...
But there's never any physical evidence of these things.
Right.
It's always sightings. I find that very odd that never, ever is there physical evidence.
Well, you've never met Bigfoot yet either.
Well,
yeah. So it could be
serious.
Yeah. Well, there was a professor at Harvard many, many years ago. I forget his last name. He wrote a very famous. He went and reviewed all the UFO abductees. It was on the front page of the Boston Globe magazine. Famous clinical psychologist, and I think he interviewed like close to 500,000 people. And he asked them, a series of questions to determine, were they hallucinating? Were they, crazy? There's apparently certain, and he said nearly all of them, 95%, had a profound experience. And he said that something doesn't make sense, that we could be on the front of the Copernican revolution. Shortly after he did that, he suddenly was found mysteriously dead. And this was a professor at Harvard. So I brought this up to Mesrich. What I'm trying to say is, I think it could be two things, or both could be occurring, Chuck. One is,
I think people in there, I'm just guessing at this, but I really believe people want to believe that these things are real and they're from outer space.
Well,
and
Chuck, you had a co-host who was taken up into a
Stop.
UFO. You did.
I don't want to talk about my co-host on Lingo, please.
But she did. She said her and her mom were taken up, and they did dental work on her mom free.
Are you serious?
She literally used to order more food at the commissary than we were supposed to have because she'd take it home to feed them. Honest to God.
I think, Chuck, the answer is you should make all of this should become transparent, and we should all have the chance to go forward. I think.
Well, there's a reason why it's not transparent. There's a fundamental reason that the government doesn't want to know or reveal what they know, and I'm not sure what that is. Whether they're using it to their advantage for some other deal. But
it's
they
timing.
Don't want us to know.
They will. I'm going to tell you where Chuck's going with this, Shiva.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've talked about on this show is that the way that the tool that government uses to get individuals to release or relinquish their sovereignty is war. So during wars, Americans give up their freedom. They give up their sovereignty. And we saw it in World War I and World War II during the Cold War. We saw it recently with the Patriot Act because we're willing to give this up. The Green New Deal, my whole thing is the Green New Deal is nothing more than a World War III that the Democrats are creating in an effort to get more sovereignty given up and more power handed over to government. Where we're talking about the UFOs is if they can't sell the Green New Deal story to get people to give up their sovereignty, what better way to get people to give up their sovereignty than to say, oh, there's little green men from space.
There's an enemy out there that no one knows about except us.
And think of one of the Democrats' favorite words, existential threat. There's now this extraterrestrial existential threat. And now we need to think about the argument for globalism.
Hey, hang on just a minute.
With UFO.
Let me insert something here and interrupt you just a second. If you look at this in the context of media, look what Hollywood has been doing forever and ever and what they're doing now.
Yeah, they just live in a world of dystopia.
Hollywood has been out in space for, 50 years? Talking about other societies, other things. In other words, it becomes more and more, the fantasy becomes more and more real every day until we've now approached a place where people are willing to accept maybe there are. Now, I don't know whether there are or not, but no one does.
Back to what I'm saying is think about how quickly or what better tool could you use to drive the concept of globalism?
Yeah, definitely.
Than a threat from outer space. Together. Shiva, tell us about the campaign now. Where are you at? What's going on with the campaign?
Well, we were the first ones to announce. So what we're doing is we're basically, we have to do all the mechanics, right? Which is get on the ground, get our volunteers. So our campaign is really going to be focused on getting on the ground, Chuck and Mark, doing it the good old-fashioned way.
What did you learn from the last campaign you ran?
Well, what we learned was, that a small group of people with a good message can have a massive impact. I mean, we had people, Chuck, on the ground putting up signs everywhere. We had probably 1,000 real Indian, fake Indian signs everywhere. That's where Warren, with all due respect to the president who did a job on hitting her with Pocahontas, it was our effort that forced her to take that DNA test, because you couldn't drive around Massachusetts without seeing her in a headdress. And she was getting hit hard. So I felt we did a great job in damaging her. We made her damaged goods in a lot of ways.
But she seems to have shook it off, though, doesn't she?
Yeah, well, the Democrat Party can shake anything off.
Right. But that's because she has full support from the media, right?
Thank you. Yes,
80-90% of the media totally supports her shaking it off. They would never let anyone else get that shaken. If this, Trump they'd be hitting him every day. So, but what we did learn was that it's the conversations we have with people, Chuck and Mark, and we can't trust the media because Facebook and Google, they can take you out. So our view is that you have to go on the ground, and it's a ground campaign. That's what we're forcing on, and getting our messaging clear.
Well, that's a grind, isn't it?
It's a grind, but you know what? Most campaigns are won on the ground. Yeah. And our view is people don't want to do that hard work. So part of Chuck and Mark, what we want to do is, if we're going to walk the walk, we're going to do the work, right? Because if we're saying the American dream is about people who work, people get on the ground, we definitely will take any media, that supports us, but it doesn't mean that media opportunity for someone like us who's coming so anti-establishment, they are always going to twist it. So ultimately the only way is to have one-on-one conversations. We flip people so quickly. I was in a bar during the middle of the campaign, and this woman says, "I hate your sign. You're a racist, fake Indian, real Indian." I go, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Do you know what I've undergone? Do you know the real racism I've undergone by these same white liberals?" She goes, "I had no idea." We flipped her. When we get on the ground, Chuck, with our volunteers, and Mark, that's where we win, because the media says, "Wait a minute, this guy's a reasonable guy. His volunteers are reasonable, hardworking people." So I've come to the conclusion that the new media is offline, that you have to go direct. It's a single piece of paper. It's meeting people face to face.
Back to the old ways.
I'm telling you, it's yeah. So if we get on, last time we were on Laura Ingram's show and Stuart Varney's, that's great, right? But I'm saying ultimately you have to go on the ground, because when people see the sincerity, what we stand for, it's going to be important. One of the things we're going to do, Mark, you may like this, and also you, Chuck, is when I created a program that in literally an hour, Mark and Chuck, I can teach people how the system works and how their body is a system, all right? And we're going to give that program away to people that I created, to people, and then we're going to teach them how they can actually affect their own health by these different things. So our view is, if we can make that simple, our campaign, as we campaign with the bus, we're actually going to educate people how their body works as a system, the same principles that everything works, and then teach them also principles on how they could understand their body. And that's why the focus of the campaign is going to be truth, freedom, and health. So our view is, if we can meet one-to-one people and say, "Hey, this guy's an activist, he's a scientist, he's a technologist, he actually helped me right now." It wasn't just campaign promises. I think it's going to be a real grassroots campaign.
Well, we wish you the best of luck, Shiva.
Thank you.
You're one of our heroes. You really are. And we really want you to be successful. It'll be better for Massachusetts. It'll be better for the country, which means it'll be better for us.
Shiva, you are a great example of, I'm going to say, Occam's razor. That the simple answer is probably the right one.
Always the right answer.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate everything you guys do. You guys are speaking the truth. You're creating the kinds of conversation we need. And that's what this country needs. We need more of that, and to push people to have that.
We're trying to create an environment where people like you can come on, express their views, let people know what you're talking about, and share it with our audience. So we really appreciate you.
Chuck and Mark, one of the things you can offer is say, "I will debate anyone on the climate change issue." Anyone.
Oh, I'll bet.
So, offer that. Let's have an open debate on climate change.
Sure.
So let's do that right now. We're going to say right now that, because we know that we have people on the left who listen to us because they send us terrible mail. So anyone, anybody who has someone who wants to make the argument and has credentials to back it up. We don't want some lunatic, but somebody who has the credentials that wants to argue we'll call it the pro side of climate change. We will offer this forum. Chuck, you and I can just be moderators to control the timing, and Shiva can come on with whoever that person is, and we will keep it fair and balanced. We really will. And the episode before this, we actually had a guy who was a liberal on, and we had a very fair and good conversation with him.
Yeah, he thought we were going to shoot him, and we didn't.
Yeah, we surprised him. But we would absolutely do that. So the last thing I want to do, folks, is tell you that go to bluntforcetruth.com, look for the episode with Shiva Ayyaduri. Right there, you'll find links to Shiva's website if you want to donate money. If you're in the area and you want to be part of his team and get on the ground, you can apply right there. We'll also have links to his social media right there. Shiva, if there is anything that we can do, I'm going to tell you completely have my endorsement.
And mine as well.
Too.
Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the things you guys can do is, as this campaign proceeds, I'd like to come back on and take like an issue, climate change, immigration, guns, and take it from a very systematic scientific viewpoint and say, here's the real problem.
You are welcome here anytime, Shiva.
Here's a real solution. I think that'll help educate people. And ultimately, I think if we educate people, people will do the right thing.
Absolutely true.
So
we need you in Senate.
You guys are doing.
We need you in the Senate.
Yep.
Folks, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like everything you heard today, remember to go to iTunes or to the Podcast One app and do a couple things for us. One, give us a 5-star review. The second thing is, if you're not subscribing to the show, hit the subscribe button, get the show automatically. The last thing I'm going to just bug you to do is to take this episode where you just heard the truth about science, where you just heard the truth about what's going on in Washington and about climate change. Take a link to this show, whether it's from our site or from wherever you get your podcast. Send a link to this show to someone you know who thinks that climate change is real, and just ask them, will you spend an hour and listen to this with an open mind? Send this to them.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thanks,
thank you, Shiva, for being on the show. We look forward to having you back, and we'll see you next time on Blunt Force Truth.
Bye-bye.